Before we begin, if you enjoy real chilling stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It really supports the channel and motivates me to share even more terrifying tales. Thank you. You're the best. Now, let's dive into what happened that night.
Dyatlov Pass, a glimpse into the darkness. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most terrifying and mysterious stories of the 20th century, still puzzling researchers to this day. In 1959, a group of 9 experienced skiers set off on a journey through the snowy slopes of the northern Ural Mountains. Their goal was Mount Otorten, a remote and challenging peak. The group consisted of young students, all physically fit and seasoned in such expeditions. But this trek would prove fatal. All the members of the group died under horrifying and bizarre circumstances that remain a mystery. No one has been able to explain what caused them to flee their tent in the middle of the night, only to perish in the freezing wilderness. The disturbing details of the tragedy have added to the spine-chilling aura surrounding this incident. The expedition began in January 1959. Led by Igor Dyatlov, the group was in high spirits. Diaries and photographs captured in the early days of the trip reveal a sense of camaraderie and calm as they navigated the harsh landscape. They climbed mountain ridges, braved freezing winds and snowstorms, but continued onward confidently. The last photo taken by the group shows smiling faces against a backdrop of snow-covered peaks. It was their final day in safety. The next day, all traces of the group vanished, and weeks later, the world would be confronted with one of the most horrifying mysteries in mountaineering history. When the group failed to return on the scheduled date, their friends and families raised the alarm. On February 20th, a rescue mission was launched. What the searchers found at the group's last campsite exceeded their worst fears. The tent, which should have been a safe haven, was slashed open from the inside, as if the group had fled in sheer terror. They had abandoned the tent in a hurry, almost without clothing, some even barefoot, despite the temperature being well below -30 degrees Celsius. The first bodies were discovered hundreds of meters from the tent, near the edge of the forest. They were found in the snow, scantily dressed, as though they had frozen to death. All the bodies were found in strange poses, as if they were running from something invisible. Other bodies were found weeks later, buried under deep snow in a ravine. Some of the victims had severe internal injuries, fractured ribs and skulls, but with no external signs of trauma that could explain such damage. One woman had her tongue ripped out, adding an even more terrifying element to the tragedy. When the bodies were examined, traces of radiation were found on some of the victims' clothing. This discovery fueled numerous conspiracy theories. What could have been the source of the radiation? There were rumors of secret military experiments in the region, possibly linked to the deaths. The Ural Mountains were a testing ground for new weapons, but no concrete evidence has ever surfaced. Local residents also reported strange lights in the sky on the night the group disappeared. Some witnesses claimed to have seen bright orbs moving rapidly across the night sky, only to vanish behind the mountains. These accounts further fueled suspicions of military involvement. But what could have caused the group to suddenly abandon their tent in such a panic? Some theories suggest that the Dyatlov group may have encountered something ancient and malevolent, hidden deep within the mountains. According to the legends of the local Mansi people, the indigenous inhabitants of the Ural region, the mountains where the group ventured are considered sacred. They believed that spirits of their ancestors resided there, and any intrusion could awaken evil forces. The Mansi believed the group had crossed into forbidden territory, disturbing the balance between the living and the dead. Footprints found near the site of the tragedy were unlike human tracks. Some researchers speculated that strange creatures or even the mountain spirits themselves may have attacked the group. Another theory involves ancient shamanic rituals that might have been performed in the area. Some believe that the group, without realizing it, became victims of shamans who were protecting their sacred lands from intruders. These rituals may have summoned natural forces to eliminate those who ventured into forbidden areas. Of course, these are merely theories, but the bizarre nature of the incident leaves room for supernatural explanations. In the following years, the Dyatlov Pass incident became a global mystery. Researchers from both Russia and abroad have continued to investigate the case, but each new examination seems to raise more questions than answers. In 2020, Russian authorities officially concluded that the group's deaths were caused by an avalanche that forced them to flee their tent in a panic. However, this explanation does not account for many of the strange details. The radiation, internal injuries without external wounds, strange lights in the sky, and the unexplained condition of the bodies. In later years, even people who ventured to Dyatlov Pass after the tragedy have reported experiencing strange phenomena. In one case, a group of tourists who visited the site in 2019 disappeared for several days. When they were found, they could not explain what had happened, but were certain they had seen strange shadows following them in the mountains. They had abandoned their campsite, just like the Dyatlov group, and wandered aimlessly, gripped by an inexplicable fear. The Dyatlov Pass remains a place of untold horror. The mountains continue to draw adventurers and mystery seekers, but local residents still warn of the dangers that lurk there. Perhaps something exists in these lands that defies human understanding, something that science cannot explain. Whether cursed or sacred, these mountains harbor one of the most terrifying enigmas, one that frightens not with what is known, but with what is still unknown. Did the hikers encounter an ancient evil, become victims of mysterious forces of nature, or die due to human error? While investigators continue to search for answers, Mount Otter 10 is in no rush to reveal its secrets. The Shadow in Pripyat, the unknown operator. In 1986, after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, thousands of people were forced to evacuate, abandoning everything in the exclusion zone. Pripyat, once a thriving Soviet city, quickly became a haunting monument to tragedy, frozen in time. It stands as a grim symbol of one of the worst industrial disasters in history. But besides the lingering radiation, Pripyat is said to hold something else. Something that terrifies even the most daring explorers who venture into its deserted ruins. In 1997, a small group of urban explorers, students from Kiev, decided to spend a few days in Pripyat, capturing documentary footage of the abandoned city. There were 4 of them, and they brought a camcorder, a map, and some spare batteries. Young and confident, they set off for Pripyat under cover of darkness, hoping to avoid security and make it into the exclusion zone undetected. The first night passed without incident. The group set up camp in one of the many abandoned apartment buildings, taking note of old Soviet newspapers and eerie, dust-covered furniture. They filmed everything they saw: the abandoned schools, a decaying amusement park, empty stores, and lifeless buildings. On the second night, they chose to stay in a high-rise once home to Chernobyl plant workers. Known among explorers as the Red House, the 9-story building had a reputation for strange occurrences. The group made their way to the 8th floor, where they found a relatively clean apartment and settled in for the night. But as the city lay silent, they began hearing something strange, footsteps echoing faintly down the dark corridor. They brushed it off, assuming it was just the sounds of an old building reacting to the night chill. One of the group members, Sasha, set up their camcorder in the hallway, leaving it to record overnight, hoping to capture any mysterious sounds or movements. In the morning, the camera was still recording. When they reviewed the footage back in their hotel room in Kiev, what they saw left them horrified. The footage showed the dark hallway, barely lit by moonlight, but at one point, the camera captured the shape of a man, slowly moving toward it. The figure was dressed in a Soviet-era jumpsuit with a hood pulled over his head, though faint light glowed from the empty sockets where his eyes should have been. The shadowy figure stopped directly in front of the camera, staring straight into the lens. The figure's face was mostly obscured, but it looked as though he was murmuring something, a quiet, almost inaudible whisper. Some of them thought it might have been another explorer roaming the same building, though they remembered seeing no one else on the night of their visit. Then upon closer inspection, they realized something chilling. They distinctly recalled that the doors to their apartment on the 8th floor had been closed that night, and the footage only showed an empty hallway. Yet when the figure appeared on camera, the doors were slightly ajar. Several paranormal enthusiasts speculated that the figure could have been an operator who had died during the evacuation or one of the disaster's casualties who never left the city. After that night, Sasha, the one who had set up the camera, couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Strange dreams began to haunt him nearly every night. In these dreams, he found himself standing in the same empty hallway, bathed in eerie light, with the same man, his empty eyes fixed on Sasha, standing in the doorway, just staring. The other two members of the group stopped visiting the exclusion zone altogether, claiming that they couldn't get rid of an intense feeling of unease that followed them everywhere. One of them even sought the help of a therapist as he began to hear faint, whispering voices whenever he was alone. Each member described these whispers similarly, faint and indistinct, like radio static, with a single repeated word, come or return. Over time, this story turned into an urban legend among explorers who visit the Chernobyl exclusion zone. They refer to the unknown figure as the Chernobyl shadow. Local researchers believe the figure is the spirit of a worker who perished in the disaster but was never able to leave the zone, now cursed to guard it. Another theory is that he might be one of the many liquidators who never returned to their families, forced to stay forever within the boundaries of the exclusion zone. Rumor has it that if you see the shadow in Pripyat, it's best to leave immediately, as his presence is a sign of danger. Once he shows up on your camera or catches the edge of your vision, he'll begin to visit you in your dreams, calling you back to the exclusion zone, or waiting until you find a way to break free of his curse. Thank you. Hospital number 9, a corridor without end. In 1908, in a small town south of Warsaw, Poland, there stood Hospital number 9, which had long gained a bad reputation among the locals. Built in the 1940s, this hospital was designed for the seriously ill and those who could not receive care in other medical facilities. It became home to the most difficult cases, where patients were given only a last chance for survival. Over time, the hospital became a place where even nurses and doctors began to whisper about unexplained events that became more and more frequent. Screams coming from empty wards, strange sounds like whispers or footsteps following you down the corridors. All of this became part of the daily life of the staff. And although many tried to explain these phenomena by fatigue or stress, every year the myths about the hospital became more real, and it became harder and harder to dare to work here. Anita, a young nurse, worked night shifts on the 3rd floor of the hospital, where the most serious patients were kept. Patients with incurable diseases who had no chance of surviving. Her duties went as usual until that fateful evening. It was one of those nights when there was not a single cloud in the sky, and the air was heavy, as if a black shadow was hanging over the town. At 2:30 a.m., a signal from room 305, which was usually empty after the last patient had died a few days earlier, flashed on the monitor on duty. The alarm was repeated over and over again, which made Anita alert. At first, she thought it might be a technical problem, but her heart told her otherwise. She took the keys and, although she felt some fear, went to the ward. When she entered, everything looked familiar. Old furniture, a cleanly made bed, but something was wrong. A black phone on the bedside table caught her attention. This phone was long out of order and had long since been replaced by newer models. But this phone, as Anita came closer, suddenly rang. In her surprise, Anita dropped the keys she was holding and picked up the phone. She could barely hear the words on the other end. "Can you see me?" Her heart froze in her chest, and a cold sweat ran down her back. She could not recover, but what she saw in the mirror shocked her even more. Behind her, clearly reflected in the mirror, stood a man in hospital pajamas. His face was covered with deep, indistinct scars, and his eyes, which absorbed everything around him, had no human expression. Anita turned sharply, but the room was empty. Feeling that something was wrong, she ran out of the room and ran to the duty officer's post. But the further she went, the longer and darker the corridor seemed. The lamps in the corridors began to go out one by one, and she found herself in a darkness that seemed alive. Her every step was accompanied by soft whispers. At first it was just a rustling, then the voices became clearer. Her name was pronounced calmly but ominously, as if in a whisper coming from the darkness. With each step, the corridor grew larger and larger, and Anita could not find the end. She could feel her heart beating faster with every movement, and then the same figure appeared again at the end of the corridor. The man in the hospital pajamas, now with his mouth open, as if trying to say something, was walking toward her. His face remained impenetrable, but his eyes absorbed more and more light, and it was more terrifying than any nightmare. He stretched out his arms and whispered, "It's time to go." Anita felt all her strength leaving her. She started to scream, but her voice was swallowed up by silence. Disoriented, she fell to the floor, not remembering how she got there. The next morning, the nurses found her sitting on the floor outside room 305, hugging her knees tightly and repeating the same words over and over again. "He won't let go." Anita was transferred to a psychiatric clinic, but it did not help. A few months later, she mysteriously disappeared, her traces vanishing as if she had never existed. Hospital number 9 was closed a few years later, but locals still say that even after that, the building was not empty. Those who dare to approach the hospital can hear the ringing of a telephone coming from the dark corridors. Those who decide to come closer hear the voice again. "Are you ready?" And no one can explain why this call comes every night or who is on the other end. Everyone who has heard this call at least once no longer dares to approach the abandoned hospital. Is this another trap for those who are too brave to find the answer? Translated with Depot.com, free version. The Tragedy of Flight 401. On December 29, 1972, during the night, Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a L-1011 TriStar aircraft, was approaching the airport in Florida after departing from New York. The plane was new, and at the time, it was one of the most modern and automated aircraft in operation. The crew consisted of the experienced 55-year-old Captain Robert Loft, 38-year-old First Officer Albert John Stockstill, and 51-year-old Flight Engineer Don Rapo. All crew members were in good spirits as the flight had been smooth and uneventful, and they were preparing for landing at Florida's airport. Captain Loft gave the command to release the landing gear, and First Officer Stockstill input the corresponding command into the onboard computer. However, after a while, Stockstill noticed 2 illuminated indicators on the instrument panel showing that the side gear was deployed, but the indicator for the front gear did not light up. This indicated that the front landing gear had not been properly locked, and landing the plane could have caused serious damage if the aircraft touched down on the nose, potentially leading to a fire or other severe damage. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the pilots began discussing the problem. They needed to determine whether the issue was with the indicator light, which would indicate that the gear was safely deployed and the plane could land, or if there was a real mechanical issue with the front landing gear, which could mean an emergency situation. However, checking this in the dark was difficult. To buy some time, Captain Loft requested permission from the air traffic controller to fly in a holding pattern. The controller agreed, providing a new course for the aircraft, maintaining an altitude of 2,000 feet, 600 meters, and allowing the plane to continue flying in a circle. Loft confirmed the instructions and handed control to the autopilot so that the plane would follow the given route while the crew focused on solving the landing gear issue. Captain Loft, First Officer Stockstill, and Flight Engineer Repo repeatedly tried to remove and reinsert the light bulb into the instrument panel, but the result remained the same. One light was on and the other was not. Then, the flight engineer descended into the maintenance compartment to take a look through a small window at the front landing gear. However, through the window, all he could see was the dark night, and nothing was distinguishable. Loft, sighing in frustration, remarked, "We're having all this trouble over a light bulb." At that moment, the autopilot disengaged. This happened because, during their manipulations with the light bulb, the pilot accidentally bumped the control yoke, causing the autopilot to turn off. The plane began to descend, and the crew did not notice because it was a dark night. There were no stars or moon visible, and the airport lights were far off. The entire focus of the crew was on the light bulb issue, so they didn't realize the plane was slowly descending. Only a few minutes later, when First Officer Stockstill noticed unusual readings on the altimeter, he asked, "Are we still at 2,000 feet?" At that moment, the crew realized the plane was much lower, and they saw that they were just minutes away from the airport. In an instant, the plane crashed into a swamp, about 30 kilometers from the airport. The crash resulted in the deaths of 9 people, including the entire crew: Captain Robert Loft, First Officer Albert Stockstill, and Flight Engineer Don Repo. 77 people survived. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, concluded that the primary cause of the crash was human error. The crew became overly focused on a minor issue with the light bulb and failed to pay attention to the aircraft's control, relying on the autopilot. After a thorough investigation, it was determined that all of the landing gear was indeed properly deployed, and the issue was merely a burned-out light bulb costing just $12. If the crew had known this, they could have safely landed the plane in Florida and saved 99 lives. The mystical consequences of Flight 401. After the crash, Eastern Airlines decided to use parts from the wrecked plane on other planes in their fleet, including the L-1011 TriStar model. One of the most talked about planes became TriStar 318, on which many parts from Flight 401 were installed. This plane in particular became associated with the most supernatural events. Crew members started noticing unusual occurrences on other TriStar aircraft. Flight attendants and pilots reported feeling strange cold air and moisture in the cabin, as well as seeing hazy figures that would appear and disappear. Some flight attendants even reported seeing the ghosts of deceased crew members, Don Repo and Robert Loft. Later, even pilots began to report strange phenomena. On some occasions, voices resembling those of the dead colleagues would appear through the communication system in the cabin. Sometimes these spirits seemed to help save planes. For instance, during one flight, when a technical malfunction occurred, a flight engineer saw a figure in the airline's uniform quickly solving the problem, only to vanish shortly afterward. Later, it was discovered that this figure was Don Repo, whose parts from the wrecked plane had been used in the repairs of other aircraft. Eventually, the company decided that these supernatural phenomena needed to be addressed. In 1974, they removed all parts from the TriStar aircraft, and soon after, the anomalous events ceased. The tragedy of Friday the 13th, the true story of the cursed house. This story dates back to the Soviet Union era. In the house where it all happened, there lived an old woman known to the villagers for her reclusive nature and strange rituals. On the night of Friday the 13th, the 90-year-old woman died in terrible agony. Her neighbors claimed to hear unearthly screams echoing through the night. Before her death, she had bequeathed her house to her 20-year-old great-granddaughter on the condition that the young woman accept her supernatural abilities. Despite the eerie rumors surrounding her great-grandmother, the young heir and her family moved into the house shortly after her passing. However, the granddaughter never embraced the witch's powers, dismissing the whispers about dark magic as old superstitions. On the 40th day after the witch's death, tragedy struck. One day, a neighbor who lived across the street decided to meet the new family. She knocked on the door for a long time, but no one answered. Just as the woman was about to leave, the door creaked open by itself. She stepped inside, but the house was eerily empty. A strange chill filled the air, and the neighbor swore she heard faint whispers coming from the shadows. This mysterious occurrence repeated for several days. Determined to uncover the truth, the neighbor began asking other villagers if they had seen the family. But no one had. The entire village soon mobilized to search for the missing family. Despite their efforts, after a week of fruitless searching, the villagers gave up, leaving the mystery unsolved. That night, the neighbor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her thoughts racing, when suddenly she heard strange noises. A rhythmic tapping sound echoed in the silence. Looking out her window, she saw a shadowy figure entering the house of the missing family. Terrified, she rushed outside, clutching a lantern. As she approached the house, she saw the figure leap out of the window with inhuman speed and disappear into the darkness. Summoning her courage, the neighbor entered the house. What she saw froze her blood. Inside were the horribly mutilated bodies of the 3 family members: the husband, the wife, who was the great-granddaughter, and their child. All 3 had their eyes gouged out, and on every mirror in the house, the name of the old sorceress was written in blood. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and an unshakable feeling of dread. The family was buried together in a small cemetery on the edge of the village. After the funeral, the neighbor, out of habit, entered the ominous house once more, determined to find some explanation for the horror she had witnessed. To her horror, she saw the same sinister silhouette staring directly at her from the corner of the room. The figure's glowing eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity. That night, the villagers heard blood-curdling screams coming from the house, but no one dared to enter. The neighbor was never seen again. Over the years, the house became a source of dark legends and rumors. People claimed to see shadows moving in the windows and hear faint whispers in the night. Some said that the spirit of the old sorceress haunted the house, enraged that her powers had been rejected. Others believed it was a curse placed upon the family for breaking the pact. The village priest attempted to bless the house, but he fled halfway through the ritual, pale and trembling, refusing to speak of what he had experienced inside. Despite its sinister reputation, a few curious individuals ventured into the house over the decades. They would return shaken, often refusing to speak of what they saw. One man claimed that when he looked into a cracked mirror in the house, he saw not his reflection but the faces of the murdered family, their hollow eyes staring back at him. Another reported hearing a chilling voice that whispered his name, urging him to leave. A group of teenagers, hoping to debunk the myths, stayed overnight in the house. By morning, only one returned to the village, muttering incoherently about a woman in black and a circle of mirrors that seemed to trap him. In recent years, the house has been boarded up and officially declared uninhabitable. Yet locals say that on certain nights, especially during storms, faint lights can be seen flickering in the windows. Some claim that if you stand near the house at midnight, you can hear faint, mournful cries and the soft hum of an old lullaby drifting through the air. On the anniversary of the family's death, the phenomena intensify. Witnesses report seeing the silhouette of a woman wandering the property, her head tilted unnaturally as if she were searching for something. No one knows for sure what happened in that house or what force continues to linger there. But one thing is certain, it remains a place shrouded in mystery and fear, a chilling reminder of a dark and tragic past. The house now serves as a warning to all who dare to meddle with forces beyond their understanding, its dark secrets locked away, waiting to claim the next victim who dares to step inside.
The terrible secret of the mirror. Don't look in it at night. It happened in France near Bordeaux. A couple passionate about antiques was traveling through the countryside in search of unique items for their home. In one of the old towns, they stumbled upon a small shop where the owner offered them a massive antique mirror. It had an exquisitely carved frame, and according to the antique dealer, it was over 200 years old. The mirror had darkened with age, and its surface was speckled with eerie stains. Attracted by the bargain price, the couple eagerly agreed to buy it. When the mirror was delivered to their home, they decided to place it in their son's room. 22-year-old Tom, a tall, athletic young man with green eyes, admired by many of his classmates. Night 1. Tom went to bed with his headphones on. The mirror stood across from his bed, with some of his clothes draped over its frame. In the middle of the night, he was startled awake by a strange sound that somehow broke through his music, a quiet but unsettling whisper. He took out his headphones and looked around. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The clothes that had been hanging on the mirror were now on the floor, neatly piled. Shrugging it off, he went back to sleep. Night 2. The same routine. Tom went to sleep with music playing, the room tidy thanks to his mother. But sometime after midnight, he woke up with a chilling sensation, like someone was breathing against the back of his neck. A shiver ran down his spine. Getting up, he walked to the kitchen, lit a cigarette, and tried to calm himself. It must have been just a vivid dream, he thought. Returning to his room, he stopped in front of the mirror and studied his reflection. Everything was normal. Even his tousled hair looked good on him. But as he turned to get into bed, unease crept in. He glanced back at the mirror, and for a split second he thought he saw something behind him. Yet when he spun around, there was nothing. He spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, haunted by vague nightmares. Night 3. Tom was already on edge. The day had been a disaster. His studies weren't going well, he got a flat tire near the house, and he had argued with his parents. Just a minute past midnight, he woke up in sheer terror. An invisible, icy hand had touched his back. He leaped out of bed, turned on the light, and scanned the room. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The mirror was fogged up. The air wasn't humid or warm, making it all the more bizarre. He wiped the glass with his hand and froze. A young woman stared back at him. She was completely nude, but her skin was wrinkled and dry, resembling that of an old witch. Her face was contorted in horror. He spun around. Nothing. Looked back at the mirror. Empty. With a pounding heart, he crawled into bed, but an overwhelming sense of impending doom lingered. Night 4. Tom felt drained and sick. That night was quiet until precisely 5:59 a.m. A blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. "Help me!" The voice belonged to a woman, echoing from within the room. Panicked, he rushed to his parents, but they dismissed his fear. His mother, a doctor, checked his temperature. It was 102 degrees Fahrenheit, 39.1 degrees Celsius. Hallucinations from a fever, she reasoned, giving him medicine and a shot to help him sleep. Night 5. Tom dreaded falling asleep. He walked up to the mirror. It seemed darker. Leaning closer, he felt an unnatural warmth radiating from the glass. He barely made it back to bed before blacking out. This time, he found himself in front of an old mansion. A young woman sat on the porch, the same one from the mirror, but now alive, fresh, and dressed in a flowing white dress. Her eyes were filled with sorrow. "I'm Maria. I came to you," she said softly, extending her hand. As he touched her fingers, realization struck. This was the same figure that had haunted him. She led him inside. There stood the mirror, but in pristine condition. "He's close. Run!" she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Tom jolted awake. His eyes darted to the mirror. Scrawled across the fogged-up glass was a single word: help. Night 6. Feeling weaker than ever, he decided to respond. He breathed on the glass and wrote, "How?" But before he could return to bed, he collapsed. His parents found him unconscious and called an ambulance. Doctors injected him with antibiotics and a sedative. That night, he dreamt of the house again. Maria was crying. I wanted to help you, but he never lets go of those more beautiful than him. Tom awoke suddenly, but she was there, standing beside his bed, her face now disfigured. Forgive me, she whispered before vanishing. Night 7. By morning, Tom was gone. His body deteriorated rapidly and doctors found no explanation. He was buried 4 days later. After the funeral, his parents and his best friend Alexander stepped into his room. They froze in horror. Tom stood inside the mirror holding Maria's hand. Their eyes pleaded for help. Then in an instant, 2 skeletal hands emerged from the darkness within the glass, dragging their spirits inside. The last thing they saw was a message forming on the mirror. Help us. His father shattered the mirror, burying the shards, but at night the house no longer echoed with cries, only quiet laughter. The Cursed House, a Mystery Beneath the Foundation. My wife Sarah had always dreamed of living in her own house, so one day I decided to make that dream come true. We built her perfect home, a spacious modern house in an upscale neighborhood. The yard was big, complete with a pool, and the interior design was straight out of a magazine. Everything brand new and luxurious. It was supposed to be our forever home. At first, everything seemed perfect. Sarah was thrilled. Our 6-year-old son Timmy loved his new room, and even our 2 Rottweilers had plenty of space to roam. But not long after we moved in, Sarah began to feel uneasy. She said there was something wrong with the house. I brushed it off as her imagination at first, but then I started noticing things too. At night, the curtains in the living room would sway as if caught in a breeze, even though all the windows were shut. Sometimes the temperature in the house would drop suddenly, even though the heating system was working just fine. And worst of all was the oppressive feeling, like someone was watching you, even when you were alone. Our dogs, usually fearless and protective, started acting strange. They would whimper and hide in Timmy's room every night. Eventually, Sarah started sleeping in there with Timmy and the dogs because it was the only place in the house where she felt safe. I thought it was all in her head until something happened to me. One night I woke up with a heavy, suffocating pressure on my chest. I opened my eyes and saw a white cat sitting on me. It was calmly licking its paws, like nothing was out of the ordinary. But the longer it sat there, the harder it was for me to breathe. When I finally sat up, the cat was gone, but the fear lingered. I decided we needed a break. We took a trip to Europe for a few weeks, leaving my older son Jason from my first marriage to look after the house. Jason, being the party-loving 20-something he was, wasted no time inviting his friends over for a rager. But the party didn't last. The next morning, Jason and his friends bolted from the house, jumping into their cars and speeding away like they'd seen a ghost. When I asked him what happened, all he could talk about was that same white cat. How could a little cat scare a house full of young adults? I was determined to figure out what was going on. We called in priests, paranormal investigators, anyone who might help. Nothing worked. Then I uncovered the most disturbing part of the story. During construction, one of the workers had fallen ill and died on site. He didn't have any ID and no one knew where he was from or how to contact his family. Instead of reporting it, the crew buried him right there on the property. But where? No one could remember. I decided to search for his remains to give him a proper burial. We dug up the yard, but nothing turned up. Then I realized the body might have been left in the foundation of the house itself. By that point, it was clear we couldn't stay. The house had become unbearable. We sold it and Sarah was devastated. She couldn't take a single thing from the house to our new apartment. It was like everything was tainted. The only thing I kept was a set of red curtains from the living room. They were beautiful and expensive, and I thought they'd be perfect in our new place. But after a few weeks, I noticed the curtains moving, even when the windows were closed. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows behind them. I threw them out. The house, as far as I know, still stands empty. I don't know who bought it or what happened to them, but I'll never forget that white cat. Who or what was it? The Forbidden Threshold, the mystery behind the door. 15-year-old Anna lived with her father in a small house on the outskirts of a picturesque European village. After her mother's death, her father became her only support. They were inseparable, spending evenings together reading books, taking walks in the forest, and talking about life. But one morning, her father told her he had to go on a business trip to a nearby city and would return very late, possibly even at midnight. He kissed her on the forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and left the house. After school, Anna did her homework as usual, prepared dinner, and sat down to watch TV. By midnight, her father still hadn't returned, so she decided to go to bed. That night, she had a strange dream. She was standing on the edge of a busy highway somewhere in the Alps. Cars and trucks sped past at insane speeds. On the other side of the road, she saw a familiar figure. It was her father. He was shouting something at her, but the roar of traffic drowned out his words. As the noise subsided, she finally heard his voice. "Don't open the door." Suddenly, Anna woke up to a loud knocking at the door. She jumped out of bed, threw on her robe, and ran to the entrance. Peeking through the peephole, she saw her father's face. He was standing there, staring straight at her. The doorbell kept ringing. "Daddy, I'm coming," she called out. She reached for the lock, but suddenly hesitated. Something about his expression seemed off. His eyes were wide open, filled with terror. A chill ran down her spine. Slowly, she slid the lock back into place. "Daddy!" she shouted. "Did you forget your keys? Ding dong! Daddy, answer me! Ding dong! Daddy, please, say something! Ding dong! Is someone there with you? Ding dong! Why aren't you speaking? Ding dong! I won't open the door until you answer." The terrifying discovery. The knocking continued, but her father never spoke. Anna spent the rest of the night curled up in the corner of the hallway, listening to the endless ringing. At dawn, the sounds finally stopped. She cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole again. Her father was still standing there. Panic swelled inside her. She hesitated, but eventually, overcoming her fear, she slowly unlocked the door and screamed in horror. Nailed to the door right at the level of the peephole was her father's severed head. His widened eyes still glistened with fresh tears. A small note hung from the doorbell with a chilling message. "Smart girl." Anna stumbled backward, choking on her own breath. The house was engulfed in eerie silence. She didn't dare step past the threshold. One terrifying thought consumed her mind. If Daddy is dead, then who stood outside the door all night? The Night Visitor. After a long and exhausting work week, I decided to escape the city as usual and retreat to my small cabin in the woods. It stood alone, surrounded by trees, my personal sanctuary. I loaded my car with groceries and a few personal belongings before heading out. By the time I arrived, the sun had already begun to set. Tired from the journey, I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I just collapsed into bed and fell into a deep sleep. A sudden piercing sound shattered my rest. The car alarm was blaring. My heart pounded in my chest. I sat up, dazed, trying to shake off the drowsiness. Maybe an animal brushed against it, I thought, peeking out the window. The yard was empty. Nothing seemed out of place. I turned off the alarm, sighed, and lay back down. 5 minutes later, the alarm went off again. Now I was getting nervous. I grabbed the remote and silenced it once more, trying to convince myself that it was just a glitch. But then, for the third time, the alarm screamed into the night. A chill ran down my spine. In a secluded forest like this, it couldn't be going off randomly. I hesitantly pulled the curtain back and froze. In the dim glow of the porch light, something moved in the bushes. At first, it was just a shadow, shifting between the trees. Then it took shape. A tall, unnaturally thin figure stepped into the light. It was draped in a long, black cloak with a deep hood. Its arms were long and skeletal, dangling at its sides. Its posture was hunched, and its slow, deliberate movement sent waves of terror through me. It approached my car, lifted one frail-looking hand, and tapped on the wheel. Then it stood motionless, listening. Moments later, it turned and retreated into the darkness. I was shaking. Did I imagine that? Was it real? My mind raced, but the fear gripping my body assured me this was no dream. Then I saw it again. This time it was at the gate. A single bony arm stretched over the top, and with an eerie ease, it slid the latch open. The gate creaked as it swung ajar. It was coming toward the house. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, and then its face appeared in the window. It was the most horrifying sight I had ever witnessed. Ash-gray skin, deeply wrinkled and lifeless. Tiny, beady black eyes like polished stones stared inside. It had no lips, just rows of sharp, yellowed teeth gleaming under the pale moonlight. Its breathing was heavy, raspy. The window fogged with each exhale, and for a moment I was grateful. Maybe the condensation would shield me from its gaze. Then came the knocking, soft at first, then harder. The doorknob rattled violently. Through the gap under the door, I saw thin, grotesque fingers reaching inside, feeling for an opening. And then, it spoke. The sound wasn't human. It was a deep, guttural growl, like a wild animal snarling when its meal is threatened. A sound filled with hatred and hunger. I stayed completely still, holding my breath. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes? Hours? But eventually, the noise stopped. The presence outside my door vanished. At some point, I must have passed out. When I woke, daylight streamed through the window. I sat up, barely believing I had survived the night. But as I approached the door, my stomach dropped. The handle was broken. Deep scratches covered the wood, as if something had tried to claw its way inside. I rushed to the window. The gate stood wide open. Wooden planks from the fence lay scattered across the path. My nightmare had been real. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the car. As I stepped outside, my eyes fell to the ground. Footprints, long, narrow imprints leading into the woods. I didn't waste a second. I jumped into my car and sped away, my hands trembling on the wheel. As I drove, I turned on the radio, trying to drown out the fear clawing at my mind. That's when I heard the news. This morning, in a nearby forest, the bodies of 2 young women were discovered. Their remains were mutilated and dumped in the swamp. My breath caught in my throat. It found someone else. The voice behind the door. One evening, when I was home alone, I got bored and decided to invite my friend over for a sleepover. I called Emily and convinced her to come, even though she hesitated because of the cold. We agreed that she would be there soon. Half an hour passed. I heard a knock on the door and Emily's trembling voice. "Open up, I'm freezing." Her voice sounded genuinely cold and desperate. I was sure it was her since she had complained about the freezing weather earlier. My hands were wet, so I shouted for her to wait a second. But the voice behind the door repeated, "I'm freezing." With each second, it grew louder, more demanding, as if it wasn't a request but an order. I thought Emily was messing with me, so I deliberately walked to the door slowly, slightly annoyed. And then, my phone rang. Her name lit up on the screen. Confused, I answered, "I'm coming. Why are you yelling?" But Emily's voice on the phone sounded puzzled. "Coming where?" "I'm so sorry, but I can't make it tonight." I froze. I was already standing by the door, my hand reaching for the lock. My mind raced. If she's not here, then who is outside? "I'll call you back," I whispered and hung up. The house fell into an eerie silence. I stood there, my back against the door, while Emily's voice continued from the other side. "I'm freezing. Let me in. I'm freezing." It sounded like a broken record now. Trembling, I felt an unbearable urge to look through the peephole. Summoning all my courage, I stepped forward and peered through it. What I saw was indescribable. That was not Emily. That was something horrifying. It couldn't be human. Its eyes, or what should have been eyes, were hollow, empty. Its skin was pale, almost bluish, as if it had been decaying. But the worst part was its mouth. When it spoke again, its lips moved in a grotesque, unnatural way, like it was struggling to mimic human speech. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. Then suddenly the voice stopped. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I barely breathed. And then, scratching. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, drilling into my mind like a scream. I wanted to yell, but my throat was paralyzed with fear. The scratching turned into pounding. "I'm cold. Let me in." The voice was no longer Emily's. It was low, guttural, monstrous. The banging grew violent. I thought the door would break. I curled up against the wall, shaking, tears streaming down my face. Then, it stopped. Silence pressed against my ears. I was too terrified to move. It felt like hours had passed, though it was probably seconds. Then my phone vibrated in my trembling hands. A message. It was blank, and from an unknown number. I stared at the screen, my mind spiraling. Just then, my phone rang again. Emily. I flinched but answered. Her voice was casual. "Why are you so quiet? Is everything okay?" I tried to speak, and I could. My voice was weak and hoarse, but I managed to ask her to come over. She sensed something was wrong and agreed. As she walked to my house, we talked on the phone. Slowly, I started calming down. I even managed to stand up and take a few steps. When she told me she was in my building, I finally exhaled in relief. The doorbell rang. No knocking. Just the bell. Without hesitation, I ran to the door, wiping away my tears. I wanted nothing more than to hug her and finally feel safe. I swung the door open and froze. That thing was standing there, holding my dead friend in its arms. The crawling terror. This happened in the summer. The weather was incredibly hot, so going outside during the day was almost impossible. I was spending my vacation in the village, and one evening I decided to take a walk with my friends. We met at the local park and started wandering around the village. We walked for a long time, almost reaching the river. Nearby, there were a few abandoned houses. There were always rumors about them as usual. People said that a crazy couple used to live there who tortured children, worshipped the devil, and performed magical rituals. The houses stood apart from the others, old, crooked, and half destroyed from time and moisture. One of my friends remembered how we were scared of these houses as children, so we wouldn't go exploring the ruins. Then she suggested we go inside to give ourselves a thrill. We sneaked through the overgrown garden and yard and entered through a window. The door was so crooked that it couldn't be opened. The floor creaked terribly and the wind whistled through the cracks. We split up. I went with Katya to check out the kitchen and bedroom, while Masha and Vera went to the basement and hallway. Suddenly, there was a terrible crash, followed by noise and then screams from our friends. We rushed to the basement door. It turned out that the old rotten stairs had collapsed when they were going down. The girls were left in complete darkness, and we used our phone flashlights to see what had happened. Masha had dislocated her leg and couldn't put weight on it, while Vera had badly scraped her knee. Fortunately, the other injuries were minor, just scratches and bruises. We realized we couldn't handle this alone and needed help. I offered to stay with the girls while Katya went to get help. While she was gone, I sat on the floor and talked to Masha and Vera, trying to calm them down. We knew we were in for serious trouble because of this adventure. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound from the dark basement. The girls fell silent, but after listening carefully, we didn't hear anything else. However, a few seconds later, Vera screamed. She shouted that something had licked her leg. I got nervous, remembering the stories about these houses. I used my phone flashlight to look around the basement, but I didn't see anything. I told the girls they were being too impressionable, but the rustling sound returned, and this time it was accompanied by hissing and some ominous breathing. I felt chills run down my spine, and panic set in. The girls were screaming, asking me to shine the light on them. I tried to illuminate the basement again, but what I saw was far worse than the darkness. In the dim light of the phone flashlight, I saw something resembling a human body but without legs and with an unusually large head. It was slowly crawling toward the girls, moving on limbs that looked like arms. Its movements were jerky, its head twitching as if in convulsions, and it left behind a trail that looked like slime or blood. The creature looked at me and hissed. I froze in place, unable to move, scream, or even blink. The creature crawled up to Masha and started licking her legs. She tried to push it away, but it was stronger. With one sharp motion, it bit off part of her arm and began greedily devouring her. Masha screamed in pain, but the creature didn't stop. It bit off chunks of her body, and soon the screams stopped. I tried to help Vera escape, but I wasn't strong enough. After a few minutes, I was thrown back against the wall, and all I had left in my hands was a part of my friend's arm. The rest was taken by that horrible creature. I was found sitting in a corner clutching the piece of Vera's arm. I don't think anyone would have believed me if it weren't for that evidence. The houses were demolished, and bones were found in the basements. According to experts, they had been recently gnawed. One of the basements was set up like a torture chamber or dungeon. I guess that's where that couple tortured children. But what was that creature, and where did it go? Strangely, the land where those houses stood was soon sold and a new house was built there. A guy moved in, and when I met him, I felt like I had seen him before. The skull in the bag. I worked for the police department in a small town in Montana. One day we received a complaint. A homeless man was wandering around town with a bag containing a human skull. Well, typical for a vagrant, but we had to check it out. We radioed around asking officers to detain him if spotted. By evening, they brought him in. The old man was dirty, reeked, but sober. Sure enough, there was a skull in the bag. We started questioning him about where he got it, but he was talking nonsense. He couldn't remember his name or where he was from. Of course, the skull could be linked to a crime, so we decided to confiscate it. As we started packing it up, the old man had a meltdown, screaming, "Don't take it, I'll die." My partner, Alex, decided not to torment the man who was clearly out of his mind. He called in a forensic expert to examine the skull. Meanwhile, he kept questioning the vagrant. The man claimed it was his skull. Not in the sense that it belonged to him, but that it was his own skull, part of his skeleton. Alex, a patient man, asked how that was possible if his head was still intact. The vagrant couldn't explain, but insisted it was true. The forensic expert arrived, examined the skull, and said it was old, but to be sure, he needed to take a sample. He took a scalpel and started scraping something off the bone. Suddenly, the vagrant grabbed his head and screamed in pain. The expert stopped, collected the samples in a piece of paper, and put it in his pocket. The vagrant calmed down. We decided to run a quick check and send the vagrant to a mental hospital. Alex called other departments asking if there had been any reports of grave robbing. Nothing. Then he tried to find a hospital that would take him, but everywhere refused, saying they were full or understaffed. Alex decided to keep him overnight and went home. The next morning he returned to find the vagrant lying on a bench outside the station. Turns out he smelled so bad that the officers on duty had kicked him out. He cried and begged to be let back in, but eventually fell asleep. They also said he'd been rambling about a sorcerer or an evil spirit, so they nicknamed him the Evil Spirit because of the unbearable stench. By noon, the forensic expert came back with a preliminary analysis. The skull was old, but it didn't seem like it had been buried for long. It was over 100 years old, but he couldn't be more precise. Alex called the local museum, asking if any bones had gone missing. Nothing. Then he got busy with other cases, and the vagrant stayed on the bench. Alex brought him food, but there was nowhere to send him. A few days passed. During that time, the vagrant told his story. It was strange but detailed. He said he used to live a good life, had a family, but forgot everything. The only thing he remembered was his fear of death. He was so afraid of dying that he met some kind of entity, a man with black eyes, no whites, and a reddish glint in his pupils. The man told him he would die if his skull was shattered, but if he carried his own skull with him, he could live as long as he wanted. He agreed, took the skull, and from that moment, forgot his name, family, and everything else. Alex felt sorry for him, but there were more pressing matters, especially since a serial killer was on the loose in the county and everyone was busy with that. Alex's boss got angry when he heard about the vagrant. He decided the skull wasn't evidence and ordered it destroyed. He took a hammer and smashed the skull to pieces. "Here, give it to him," he said. Alex went outside, and the vagrant was lying by the bench. His head was deformed as if someone had smashed it with a hammer. He was dead. We called the same forensic expert. He shook his head. He'd never seen an injury like that. There was no blood, but the skull was shattered. The case was closed. The body and skull fragments were cremated. All documents were destroyed to avoid further questions.
I guess most people do. I don't remember much from that time. I must have been around 2 years old. The memories are scattered and dreamlike. A wide street passing by outside, my mom's face with red curls brushing against me, my crib with towering, impossibly high rails, a little pink horse dangling above me on a string, and my grandmother. She would stand beside my crib, leaning over and talking to me. She wore a white headscarf tied low on her forehead, almost over her eyes. Her brown hand reaching out to me smelled of earth and milk. I remember being scared of her at first, even whimpering when she came close. That wrinkled, rough, warm hand brushing my cheek frightened me. When I cried, my mom would come running, pick me up, and give me a bottle of milk. My grandmother would just stand nearby, watching us from under her brow. I would babble, "Baba, Baba," and my mom would smile. Eventually, I got used to my grandmother, even looked forward to seeing her. Most often, she'd sit on a chair by the door, and when I woke up, I'd grab the bars of my crib, stand up, and call for her. She would smile and come over to me. Sometimes I could hear my parents arguing in the other room. It made me scared, but my grandmother would calm me down and the fear would pass. Then we moved. I don't remember the move itself very well, but I remember the walls in the new room were green instead of blue, and my mom started sleeping beside me. My dad wasn't with us anymore, and neither was my grandmother. I cried. I missed her. Eventually, I got a new grandmother. My mom's mom moved in with us. She wasn't like the one before. She smelled sweet and floral, not like earth and milk. But I adjusted quickly. I grew older and learned more about the world. The image of my first grandmother started to fade. I came to understand she must have been my dad's mother, and I never asked my mom about her. I already knew what divorce was and why my dad wasn't around. When I was 16, I found an old black plastic bag in a closet filled with photographs. To my delight, one of them showed my grandmother. In the faded black and white picture, She stood beside a wooden fence, her hands clasped branches of a mountain ash tree leaning down toward her white headscarf. I kept the photo and hid it in my jewelry box. I didn't show my mom. Now I'm 22. I'm married and pregnant with a baby boy. Just a few days ago, my mom and I were going through my old baby things. She had saved a lot, picking out items for the new baby. We started chatting, and I asked what I was like as a toddler. She was saying the usual things, but then she said something strange. She said she and my dad divorced because of me. And thank God they did, she added. She said that when I was 2, she couldn't sleep anymore because I kept talking to someone in my room at night. That she would break out in cold sweat when she saw me standing in my crib, smiling and reaching out toward nothing. That when she picked me up, she'd constantly catch a glimpse, just in the corner of her eye, of someone standing behind her. She said my room always smelled like fresh earth, that the door kept opening and closing on its own. She said my dad called her crazy, and that one night she woke up and saw her, my grandmother, standing over their bed. She said she was so terrified she wet herself. My dad woke up, they fought, and it was the beginning of the end. I sat there, stunned, listening. I always thought she was Dad's mom, I told her. I remember her. My mom shook her head. Sweetheart, your dad's parents live in the Pacific Northwest. They never visited us. I brought her the photo I'd found years ago. She flinched when she saw it. I don't know who this is, she said. I remember that bag of pictures, but I don't know where they came from. I just threw them into a suitcase when we moved and later put them in the closet. I told my husband everything. He was a little skeptical. I hope he believes me. I really do. Because I don't want him to leave me when our son starts reaching into an empty room and saying, "Grandma."
Before we begin, if you enjoy real chilling stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It really supports the channel and motivates me to share even more terrifying tales. Thank you. You're the best. Now, let's dive into what happened that night. This happened not too long ago. My parents had gone out to a birthday party at some friend's house, and I stayed home. I never really liked those people. You know the type. Always nosing into your life, asking when you're going to settle down, get married, all that. Every family has at least one couple like that. But anyway, that's not the point. So I'm home alone. It's around 6 p.m., I think. Wintertime, so it's already dark outside. I was watching a movie, but I could barely concentrate. There was a huge snowstorm going on, and since I live in a private house, all I could think about was how I'd have to shovel my way out in the morning. Again, it started getting cold, so I stoked the wood stove, made myself some tea, and sat by the window. The storm had calmed down. Sky cleared up. Full moon, bright like a spotlight. But the wind kept howling like crazy. I stepped out on the porch for a smoke. That's when I heard our dog, Buddy, a big German shepherd, start barking his lungs out. Not his usual bark. This was the someone's here kind of bark. I figured someone might be at the gate. Went out to check. No one. Still, Buddy wouldn't calm down, barking like he was losing his mind. "Cut it out, idiot," I said. "No one's there." Tossed the cigarette over the fence and went back inside, planning to hop on my PC and game for a bit. That's when the power cut out. Great. I lit some candles and sat down with my phone. Was playing something to kill time when I heard it, a soft creaking sound from the attic, like slow footsteps, not stomping, just moving. Suddenly I remembered Buddy's barking. Maybe someone did get in. Jumped over the fence. I grabbed a kitchen hatchet just in case. Yeah, it's a small house, not much worth stealing, but you never know who's desperate. I stepped outside quietly, trying not to crunch the snow. No tracks. None. Climbed up to the attic entrance. Still nothing. The attic door was latched from the outside. Weird. I unhooked it and shined my flashlight inside. Empty. Not a soul. But I know I heard someone walking. Smoked a cigarette while standing there, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I imagined it. Went back down. Still no power. House was dead silent. About 30 minutes later, noise again. Louder this time. Definite movement in the attic. Something scraping. I grabbed the hatchet and went up again. As I approached the door, the noise stopped. Gotcha now, you bastard, I thought. Swung the door open and burst in with the flashlight. Again, nothing. No one. Hello, who's up here? Show yourself. I checked every corner. Empty. But I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my spine. I was starting to feel genuinely scared. Nothing made sense. I muttered some curses under my breath and headed for the door, and it slammed shut right in front of me. Wind, sure, it was strong, but how did the latch hook itself from the outside? It didn't make sense. Someone must have lured me up here to trap me while they raided the house. I smashed the door open with the hatchet and sprinted back down. House was untouched. Nothing missing, nothing out of place. I was completely alone. What the hell? I decided it was time for backup power. Fired up the generator. Lights came on in the house and outside. 5 minutes later, everything cut out again. Maybe the generator ran out of diesel. But I hadn't heard any sputtering, and I hadn't let go of the hatchet. Then more banging from the attic, this time violent, loud. Someone was up there. I went to grab my phone to call the cops. Dead, 0 battery. It was at 80% like an hour ago. Guess I drained it playing games. Idiot. Panicking now, I ran outside. Didn't want to go back up there alone. I stood at a distance where I could see all entrances and exits. No one came down. Nothing moved. I shouted, "Hey, I know you're up there. Come down, you freak." No response. Climbed up again. No tracks in the snow. Nothing. No sign of anyone. But I swear I saw a shadow flicker inside the attic window. That was how it went the entire night. Whispers, movement, shadows. Once I even heard a rasping voice like a hushed wheeze. Couldn't make out the words. I don't even believe in ghosts. I'm 22, I work out. I'm not the kind of guy who scares easy. But that night, I was terrified. At sunrise, power came back. I walked into the kitchen and my phone was just lying on the table. Powered on. 50% battery. The generator still full of diesel, running perfectly. No reason for it to shut off. I never told my parents. They got home around noon. I just pretended everything was fine. I've never heard anything up there again. Not a creak, not a whisper. But I still wonder, what the hell was up in the attic that night? And I really don't want to believe it was a ghost.
They lived in a small house outside the city, surrounded by a dense forest. The house was old but cozy, with a large garden where the children loved to play. The husband, wife, and their 2 sons, 8-year-old Mark and nearly 6-year-old Joseph. The woman had always dreamed of having a daughter. She loved her sons and was proud of them, but the dream of a little girl had been with her since childhood. Her own mother had passed away early, and she had always wanted to feel the same bond she once had with her. After numerous visits to doctors, examinations, and tests, they learned the harsh truth. After her last childbirth, she could no longer have children. This news shattered her. She began to withdraw into herself, spending hours in her room staring out the window at the forest that had once inspired her. Seeing her in this state, her husband and children held a family meeting. After long discussions, they came to a decision. If they couldn't have a daughter of their own, they would adopt one. And so, 7-year-old Annabelle joined their family. The girl was incredibly sweet, like a ray of sunshine glowing from within. Her golden hair and big blue eyes seemed so pure that even the forest around the house seemed to come alive with her smiles. Annabelle quickly bonded with the boys, especially Mark, who became her best friend. Everything was going wonderfully. Joseph's birthday was approaching and the family was preparing a grand celebration. Balloons, garlands, a cake shaped like the boys' favorite hero. Everything was ready. But it was not meant to be. One rainy autumn evening, the couple went out to buy the last few things for the party: balloons, the cake, and so on. They left the children under Mark's supervision. They returned late at night after the rain had stopped, but the forest around the house seemed eerily quiet, as if waiting for something. They entered quietly, not wanting to wake the children. They turned off the TV in the living room. Mark had probably been watching it and forgot to turn it off as usual, and went upstairs to their bedroom. They decided to check on the children. Mark's room was empty, only scattered clothes and a messy bed. Frightened, they ran to the other rooms. But Joseph and Annabelle were also missing, with only chaos left behind. Horrifying thoughts raced through their minds. Suddenly, a faint rustling sound came from their bedroom, as if someone was flipping through the pages of a book. The couple rushed to the door. What they saw there they would never forget. By the bed near the window lay Joseph's mutilated body. The boy was covered in blood, as if he had been bitten or clawed. His clothes were torn and his face was frozen in an expression of terror. In the far corner, Annabelle sat with her back to them. The woman ran to the girl, wanting to hug her, but she wasn't scared. She was just sitting there, eating Mark. Annabelle turned her head, chewing greedily. Her blue eyes, which had once seemed so pure, now burned in the dark like those of some insane creature. She looked at the woman and whispered, "Mommy, don't you love me anymore?" The woman began to back away toward her husband, who was sobbing over Joseph's body, while Annabelle slowly crawled after her, never taking her eyes off her. The police broke down the door. A foul stench spilled out into the street. The neighbors had called them when the family stopped appearing. The police found 4 mutilated bodies. Amidst the horror sat the girl. She stared at the bloody bodies and muttered incessantly, "Mommy, don't you love me anymore?" Her voice was quiet, but every word echoed in the minds of the officers, who couldn't understand what had happened in that house. Later, it was revealed that Annabelle was no ordinary girl. Her past was shrouded in mystery. She had been found in an abandoned house in the forest where the police had discovered several missing children. No one knew where she had come from, but now it was clear that she was not what she seemed.